Now I know I've never really discussed it before, but I love the Nicktoons. With SpongeBob SquarePants, Fairly Odd Parents, and Avatar The Last Airbender being some of my favorite shows of all time. So what would it feel like if the Nicktoons teamed up to save the multiverse? I'll tell you what it would feel like. The Nicktoons Unite franchise. Yeah, you heard correctly. This is an actual franchise with world building. And because I've recently completed every single game in the saga, I not only wanted to discuss the 4 console games, but the 7 handheld games we also have. We've got 11 games to look at, people, so get comfy. This is gonna be a long one. It's time this franchise got the respect it deserves. This is the Nicktoons Unite franchise. Starting with Nicktoons Unite, released on October 26, 2005 for PlayStation 2, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, and DS. The beginning of this insane series of games. But does it still hold up nearly 20 years later? Let's find out, starting with the console version. The game starts with Plankton invading Bikini Bottom and Goddard appearing through a portal. He then sends a message to SpongeBob from Jimmy Neutron stating that despite never meeting before, they're friends. Yeah, that's not weird at all. And that the multiverse is in danger and they need to team up. SpongeBob agrees and then goes to Jimmy's lab, the main hub of the game, where Jimmy has also recruited Timmy Turner and Danny Phantom. Jimmy then explains to the team that because of his universe portal, very creative name, the 4 Nicktoon villains have teamed up to destroy their worlds. These villains being Plankton, Vlad, Mr. Crocker, and Professor Calamitous. Now it is up to SpongeBob, Danny, Timmy, and Jimmy to defeat the villains and save their worlds. Thus, these guys would become an iconic team. While the story is extremely simple, it does work as a first installment for the series of licensed games. These interactions between them are a fun time, and you even get to encounter some side characters from these shows. They even reference the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour at one point.
Hi, Cindy! Oh, hi, Timmy. I didn't know you were back in Retroville.
So it does feel like they wanted this to feel as epic as it possibly could have for a licensed game. Heading into Danny's world, I'd say it's time we talk about the gameplay. What you're doing is solving puzzles and fighting enemies to get to the end of a level. You're given access to all 4 characters at all times, so you're bound to get used to them. Danny and SpongeBob are melee characters, while Timmy and Jimmy are ranged characters. Unfortunately, the balancing kinda sucks. SpongeBob felt way faster than Danny, and Timmy felt more powerful than Jimmy. So the combat, while not the worst, isn't that great either and could use some better balancing. Each character has a few different abilities to solve puzzles, but a lot of them are upgrades which you will find in the levels. Danny can control enemies, phase through walls, and yell to shatter fragile objects. SpongeBob can absorb water, send out Doodle Bob, and throw bombs. Timmy can freeze things, use super strength, and heal. And Jimmy can shrink objects, launch light, and charge at things. These different abilities are truly what makes these guys stand out, and it's pretty fun figuring out the solutions to each puzzle. Another aspect of this game is if you either find Goddard or beat a level, you can upgrade your character's abilities by spending coins you collected throughout the levels, which is pretty neat. The final thing I want to talk about in regards to the gameplay are the bosses. They kinda suck. A lot of them are you just waiting for the opportunity to defeat the boss with its weakness. Mr. Crocker in particular took ages to beat because he would just keep healing himself. It's also worth noting that in the first SpongeBob level, the game would not let me bounce on a certain jellyfish, and I had to restart the level because of it. So it's not the most polished game I've played. Overall, the gameplay is decently fun, but it can get repetitive at times. But let's now discuss the presentation. Visually, While I understand this was made during a time where the technology was limited, I can't deny that it looks worse than games like Battle for Bikini Bottom, despite that game being 2 years older. The models have this very weird outline to them and the environments look a little dull. The music is also this very strange elevator music that doesn't suit the game at all, but it's kind of funny. And speaking of the audio, some of the cutscenes are just...
Quietly. No one must know we are here until we find Agent Star.
Hey, SpongeBob! Don't tell anyone, but Sandy made me a secret agent!
Patrick! Watch out for that jellyfish harvester! Patrick, no! Wow!
Help! Kind of. It tickles. Sponge, help! SpongeBob, help! Ouch! Sponge, ouch! Sponge, ouch! Just SpongeBob!
Don't worry, SpongeBob. We'll get him back. Let's stick to Sandy's plan. We'll take out these jellyfish harvesters and then enter Plankton's fortress. We'll find Patrick there.
I guess it's time to wrap this up. After defeating Vlad, Plankton, and Crocker, we go inside Goddard and complete different trials to obtain a flea bot. We then head to the final boss, the Evil Syndicate. After one really long battle, Calamitous has one last trick. He activated a self-destruct. But then SpongeBob saves them. Our heroes then say goodbye and head back to their world. And that is Nicktoons Unite. Now, Nicktoons Unite is not a bad game, but it has a few problems. I do like that everyone plays differently, but the game does get a little bit repetitive with how long these levels can go, and even in regards to the different abilities, some characters are just better to use than others. I also find it weird that Danny and SpongeBob's worlds get 3 levels, Timmy's world only gets 2, and Jimmy's only gets 1. But clearly this game did something right for it to start an entire franchise. Overall, I'd say Nicktoons Unite on console is alright. Do I respect it? Absolutely, but it definitely has flaws. But we aren't done with Nicktoons Unite just yet, because we still have to talk about the handheld versions. Will they be any better? Let's find out by starting with Nicktoons Unite for Game Boy Advance. This version of the game largely has the exact same story as the console version, so no need to go over it again. What I will discuss is the laughably awful presentation. This legit looks like one of those meme template things on DeviantArt. It's that bad. Honestly, the presentation as a whole looks really strange. And the reason why it looks this way is because the developers took the models from the DS version of the game and converted them into sprites. It's most noticeable with SpongeBob. Hey, at least the music is pretty catchy, honestly better than the console version. Strangely enough, its graphics are so strange that I kinda love it. It has this very bizarre charm to it, so it at least has that going for it. Getting into the gameplay, it's a 2D puzzle platformer, but when you start a level, you can only choose 2 of the 4 characters, and the only way you can switch characters again is by going into one of these character machines during a level. As for the characters themselves, Danny can shoot projectiles and phase through walls. SpongeBob can also shoot projectiles in a very bizarre animation and squeeze into tight spaces. Timmy can cause a fairy explosion and fly. Jimmy can freeze enemies and also fly. Yeah, they don't try nearly as hard with character abilities in this version compared to the console version. What you use these abilities for is to not only get to the end of a level, but to destroy 3 portals and find 4 chips. Despite the fact that you had to keep track of 7 things and get to the end of a level, it isn't as tedious as it sounds, and at least controls well enough. I kinda like how floaty the characters feel. But I would still prefer the option to switch between all 4 characters at all times. It would just make things a little bit easier. Each world gets 2 levels and a boss fight. Speaking of the bosses, these are ridiculously easy. There are no lives in this version of the game, and every time you die, your health resets, but not the bosses. These are literally impossible to lose at. The final boss is at least the tiniest bit interesting, with Calamitous sending all the other bosses to fight you, and he occasionally fights himself, but it's nothing all that spectacular, and that is Nicktoons Unite for Game Boy Advance. Didn't really have a lot to say about this one. This one was just plain weird. From its bizarre graphics to some of its gameplay mechanics, it's a very strange game. But despite being kinda tedious at times, I still had some fun with it, even if it's a really short game. I barely had anything to talk about with this one. But trust me when I say the rest of these games have a lot more to offer, for better or worse. So let's talk about the final version of Nicktoons Unite, the DS version. Starting up this version, it literally starts in a similar way to the GBA version. That's not a good sign. But presentation-wise, it's way better than the GBA version, mainly because they're actually using the models for its intended version, and the music is also pretty good, just as good as the GBA version. The gameplay, though, is not something found very often on the DS. A 3D platformer, and considering my favorite game ever is a 3D platformer on the DS, it already gets a tiny bit of bias from me. But onto the game itself. Much like the other versions, the characters play differently, but unlike the GBA version, you don't have to find an area to switch characters. You can just choose who you want to play as using the touchscreen. It is also used to activate the character's special abilities, which we will get into a little later. This makes things way easier, and switching characters just feels instant, which is very much appreciated. And as for the characters themselves, Danny can shoot projectiles, wall jump, and go through ghost portals. SpongeBob can also shoot projectiles, glide, and fly in a bubble. Jimmy can shrink enemies. What is with these handheld versions and not giving Jimmy a proper attack? Double jump and fly with his jetpack. And Timmy can run fast and hide in a bush and stun certain enemies. That is definitely a bizarre moveset for Timmy. He also has these sneaking segments that are absolutely brutal and go on forever, so that wasn't fun. Sadly, this still ain't perfect, because the controls aren't really the best. If you think 64DS's controls are bad, I beg of you, please play Nicktoons Unite DS and you will honestly kind of miss it. Now don't get me wrong, they aren't the worst, but it did get noticeable enough to where it just got plain annoying at times. But the game doesn't just have platforming, it also has touchscreen minigames. These suck. Now I may be in the minority when I say I don't necessarily hate when a licensed game throws in some mini games you have to play, so long as they're fun. But most of these are either really easy, like saving side characters from villains by tapping on circles, and that's it. Or they're incredibly annoying, like these minigames where you have to circle around jellyfish or fairies to save them from machines. Because even though I would circle around them, they would, for whatever reason, not get in a bubble. I appreciate them for wanting to have some variety, but these minigames aren't very good. The last thing I want to talk about are the boss fights. These also suck, but for completely different reasons. Vlad I defeated in like 15 seconds. Plankton took ages to beat, because how are you supposed to know that you can run fast as Timmy, then attack him? Mr. Crocker was just weird. And you don't even fight Calamitous, you just play some mini games, do some platforming, and bam, the game's over. And that's Nicktoons Unite on DS. I really wanted to love this version. It's a genre that wasn't done very often on the DS, but the weird controls, difficulty spikes, and strange choices it makes prevent it from being above average. Really, the main thing it has going for it is that it's a 3D platformer on the DS, which is always really neat to see. I appreciate the developers making something risky and ambitious, but nah, this sadly ain't it. And that covers all 3 versions of Nicktoons Unite. Okay, maybe this wasn't necessarily the best start to the series. The console and GBA versions had neat ideas, but were also flawed, and the DS version was just kind of frustrating. But clearly this franchise did something right for it to not only be seen as a crossover classic even 20 years later, but it eventually led to a sequel. Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island. Released on October 24th, 2006, nearly a year after the last game, for PlayStation 2, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, and DS. The long-awaited sequel to the critically acclaimed cult classic crossover game. Can this be an improvement from the first game? Let's find out, starting with the console version. So the game starts with this group of crabs summoning the 9 chosen ones to defeat the Magu and save Volcano Island. However, we only get SpongeBob and Danny at the start of the game, as the other characters are scattered across the island. The other ones in question are Timmy, Patrick, Sandy, Sam, Jimmy, Squidward, and Tucker. Now, even though I described it having 9 playable characters, in reality, it's only 6. Squidward, Tucker, and Jimmy, surprisingly enough, aren't playable at all. Another strange choice is that it felt like we were going to have more franchises added to the game. Concept art shows that XJ9 was planned to be in the game, but she was sadly scrapped. Also, from what I heard, apparently Aang was planned to be in the game, and this was also scrapped. But I couldn't find anything related to that, so I'm not entirely sure if this is true. There are also a few Invader Zim Easter eggs for some reason, even though there are no Invader Zim characters in this game. So even though the roster is bigger, it still sucks that some franchises were removed or only have a minor role in the story. But I will give props and say that the actual story itself felt way better than the first game, especially since they acknowledge that this is a sequel.
Hey, look! That's London's big robot baby! Oh, sure showed me.
Yeah, you sure did, SpongeBob. Do you guys need airproofing?
I'm still okay, thanks to Jimmy Neutron's moisture spray. How about you, Patrick?
Oh no, I'm not delicate like SpongeBob.
Hey!
The characters added lead it to some fun interactions, and the Magu is a pretty neat villain, so it has that going for it. As for the gameplay itself, there were some pretty big changes compared to the first game. While you can still switch between different characters in a level, you don't actually need to because all 6 characters play the exact same. Which in some ways I do understand, but I would be lying if I said it wasn't a bit lame. The fact that all the characters control differently in the first game just made it feel even more like a crossover. But another disappointing aspect is that you also can't choose who you want to bring into a level. This is especially bad for Timmy considering he's only playable in 2 out of the 17 levels in this game. And one of them is a bonus level, which I will get to a little later. But as a trade-off, the movement feels way better than it did in the first game. Jumping and attacking feel a lot faster, and it's just a better experience control-wise. Every character also has an attack meter that they can use to shoot projectiles, except Patrick, who for some reason just does a cartwheel. The level design also prioritizes platforming over solving puzzles, and while I would have liked a balance of both, the platforming in this game is still pretty fun. After beating the level, you get sent to the hub world, Camp Castaway, although I don't really know what the point of this was, considering the game just spawned you to the area you're supposed to go to, and you can just use the level select to go back to a previous level, or to go to a bonus level, or a different area. The only thing worth here is the art gallery, where you can look at some concept art, and the theater where you can rewatch the cutscenes. The bosses are also not hard at all. For 2 of them, you just shoot at them, and for 1 of them, you just wait until its mouth is open. As for other stuff in the game, there are some additional costumes for each character. Now, there were costumes in the first game, but the way you had to get them was just absurd. That being, you had to have save data of certain Nickelodeon games on your memory card, and this could only be done on the PS2 version and not the GameCube version. While in this game, you certainly just have to get a certain amount of collectible items to unlock them. Although some of these costumes are kinda weird, like, why is there Tribal Patrick and Cheerleader Sandy? There are also achievements to complete, which is pretty neat, but without a doubt, the coolest thing in this entire game are the bonus levels. To unlock them, you need to find 4 of every character's special items, and once you do, you can access a bonus level for that character. These are more like speed challenges rather than actual levels, but I still find it really cool that they design dedicated levels with each character, and it's a neat reward for exploring all the levels. Presentation-wise, there are some major improvements. The cutscenes are way more fluid despite the same models being used from the first game. The music also fits way better and isn't just some strange elevator music. And the audio quality isn't absolute garbage. Unfortunately, a lot of this game takes place on either beaches or jungles, so the level variety is worse than the first game. At least the bonus levels look cool, but now let's wrap this up and get to my final thoughts. After creating a device that allows us to confront the Magu, we play through the final level in the game that both looks cool and is kind of tough. Then we finally fight and defeat the Magu as he swears his revenge. The chosen ones celebrate and they all return back to their worlds. And that was Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island. Now, even though there were things this game did worse than its predecessor, like the characters not feeling different and the poor level variety, this was honestly more fun than the first game. A better story, smoother gameplay, and having additional content. This was honestly a really fun time, and much like the first game, this one has handheld ports. So let's talk about them too. Starting with Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island for Game Boy Advance. This version of the game has the same story, much like the other handheld ports, but there are a few differences. One difference is that Sandy, Sam, Squidward, and Tucker are not here, so the only playable characters are SpongeBob, Danny, Timmy, and Patrick. Jimmy is here, but much like the console version, he's just been relegated to an NPC role. But that's all I've got for story. As for the gameplay, what we've got is a 2D puzzle platformer where every character has a different ability. SpongeBob can blow bubbles, but instead of attacking enemies, it's used for these puzzles where you have to aim them. There actually isn't any combat in this game, meaning that every enemy is a hazard that you cannot get rid of. And later on in the game, he can dig through certain paths. Danny can phase through different blocks, Timmy can launch himself using these rings you can grab onto, and Patrick can stick onto green walls and later can glide with his pants after being shot out of a cannon. Now these abilities may sound basic, and they kind of are, but trust me when I say the game uses these abilities in really creative ways to the point where it's actually pretty difficult at times. It's actually insane how tough this game gets, but it's a fun kind of tough, and it gets more challenging with the golden hearts, because it's not enough to just collect the heart. You have to collect it and never get hit a single time. Thankfully, these levels aren't too long, they're around 2 to 4 minutes, but this is quite the task, and I honestly had a lot of fun getting these. There are some that did feel a little unfair, like some of the digging ones as SpongeBob, or the gliding ones as Patrick feeling a little luck-based, but aside from that, it's honestly really fun getting these. There's also a few bonus levels you can get after collecting a certain amount of hearts, but these aren't as creative as the console version. They're just 3 levels in space, and they're pretty much the hardest levels in the game. These aren't bad, they're just not as memorable as the console version. Presentation-wise, it's super freaking charming. The sprite work is just adorable and really well done, and the music is so freaking catchy and has a neat retro feel to it. They did not need to put this much effort into a GBA port of a licensed game, but it made the experience way better. Now let's head into the final level and wrap up this version. You might have noticed that I didn't talk about any boss fights while discussing this version, and that's because there aren't any. For the final level, you just dodge the Magu's attacks, and that's about it. You defeat the Magu and everyone returns home, much like the console version. And that is Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island on Game Boy Advance. This version was surprisingly really good, especially given how strange the last GBA game was. But this game had so much fun and challenging gameplay and charming presentation. But can the last version have the same ambition the other versions had? Let's find out with Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island for DS. Once again, the story in this version is similar to the other 2 versions we talked about, but with some changes. Like Patrick and Tucker are here, but they aren't playable. Sandy and Sam are also not in this version, and Jimmy is actually on the island itself, unlike other versions, where we spoke to him via a communicator. But for whatever reason, he's not playable. I assume to stay true to the other versions, but it's still just a weird decision to put in here. But that's about it for the story. Directing our focus onto the gameplay, it's very strange. It sadly isn't a 3D platformer like the previous DS game, but given the flaws with that version, it's probably for the best that they went with something less ambitious. You can switch between SpongeBob, Danny, and Timmy on the fly, and they have a unique little quirk to them. SpongeBob can glide with his pants, Timmy has a double jump, and Danny doesn't really have one outside of, I think, being the strongest, so I almost never used him. Considering this is a licensed DS port, they're obviously gonna shove in some touchscreen mechanics, but instead of it being a few mini-games like the last DS game, it's instead used to sprinkle pepper into these weird dog plants and make them sneeze these gems you need to get in order to progress. And as if that wasn't weird enough, you need to find specific dog plants that will give you a gem because some of them give you nothing. It's a very strange mechanic that honestly isn't fun. Why isn't just finding the dogs enough? Why does there have to be fake ones? But that's only the first half of the levels. The second half is you just getting to the end of a linear hallway. Before finishing a level, you also have to play this pointless fruit-catching minigame that doesn't control all too great. But after I completed the first level, I saw something that no one ever told me in regards to this version of the game. a ranking system. I thought surely that was gonna make things way more interesting, until I realized that if you collect all 20 special coins in a level, you'll get an A rank every time regardless of how well you did. You could go as slow as you want, get hit as much as you want, but as long as you collect all these coins, you're fine. Which is extremely lame. Just do this for 5 more levels. Yes, there are only 5. And that's pretty much the gist of this version. It's very weird, but collecting the coins was decently fun and gave me a reason to explore the levels. There are also bosses in this game, but they're no challenge. Shocking, I know. Presentation-wise, while it's not as fluid as the GBA version, it still has pretty good sprite work and really catchy music. I really like the minigame music. Kinda sounds like you would hear something at a bar. And honestly, the backgrounds in this game are beautiful. I love the way they look. And after defeating the Magu and everyone returns home, that's a wrap for Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island DS. This one wasn't bad, but it's the worst of the 3 versions, with it only having 3 characters, some weird quirks with its gameplay, and a pointless ranking system. It had some solid presentation and collectibles to find, and it wasn't as frustrating as the previous DS game, but I'd probably say this is the most forgettable out of all the games we looked at so far. And that covers all 3 versions of Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island. Man, what a major improvement from the first game. Every version I looked at so far has been better than the first game's respective versions. While the roster did have a few flaws, it more than made up for it by making improvements to the story and gameplay. But with all that said, we are now heading into the 3rd installment of the series. Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots. Released on October 23rd, 2007 for PlayStation 2, Wii, Game Boy Advance, and DS. Can it continue the hype of this franchise? Let's start out with the console version. So the game starts with Professor Calamitous entering this game show called The Biggest Genius, and him using fairy magic, ghost energy, and Krabby Patties to create evil toy minions. Even the Magu makes a small cameo. Meanwhile, SpongeBob and Patrick are delivering 3,287 Krabby Patties to a totally not evil factory, but Patrick gets trapped and SpongeBob goes in to rescue him. They both eventually run into Tack. You know, that guy. Then after freeing Timmy and Jimmy, the Nicktoons meet Chadbot, who makes a deal with Jimmy that if they collect more master models, he will help them defeat Calamitous. I'd say this is probably the best story out of all the games so far. I just find it cool that the Nicktoons have to traverse these factories to help a Calamitous minion collect Nicktoon figures. And with everyone except Sandy returning from the previous 2 games, it leads to even more interactions, which is always appreciated. But how is the gameplay? The gameplay is somewhat similar to Battle for Volcano Island, but there is a much bigger emphasis on platforming, with combat being extremely simple. And it has similar platforming to something like Crash Bandicoot. You can select which 2 characters you want to play as, which is very much appreciated, but this sadly means that much like Battle for Volcano Island, all the characters play the same once again, which is a shame given the roster this game has, but I'll discuss that later. I'd say this was a fair trade-off though. But the platforming itself is really fun. You are constantly dealing with these new obstacles, and it's actually pretty challenging at times. But thankfully, when you die, you instantly respawn within a second, so it never gets tedious. There are also a few different gameplay styles and extra content that I want to discuss. There are 3 characters who get their own bonus minigames that you need to beat in order to get certain items. The first one is SpongeBob sliding on pipes with his tongue, gross, And this one is actually decently fun, if not a bit annoying considering there are no checkpoints. But these only last around 90 seconds, so it's not too bad. The second one is Danny going ghost and traversing through these mazes under a time limit. These ones are kinda lame and drag on for a while. The third one is Tak getting the ability to jump higher, making for some pretty interesting platforming. Definitely the best one, even if it's not really a minigame. Sadly, those are the only 3 characters that have minigames. The rest just get platforming challenges, which is a bit disappointing. But at least it's enough of a reason to try all the characters out. Speaking of which, after you beat a minigame or a mini level, you end up in this Invader Zim room where you have to fight enemies in order to get a master model, the main collectible of the game. This is a really cool way to introduce more Nicktoons into the game, even if they are just PNGs, but they're kinda neat to look at. But these rooms also contain what is without a doubt the coolest thing about the game. The secret characters, in which there are 4 of them: Stimpy, Rocco, Gurr, and XJ9. And combined with the base characters, this roster consists of 11 characters, which is huge for a game like this. Now, as cool as it is that you get to play as these characters, they unfortunately kind of feel like late additions. You don't need them to beat the game, they don't show up in any of the cutscenes, they don't get any mech suits, and you don't go to their world. But despite that, I still find it awesome that they're even in the game at all, especially given how many unused voice lines the characters have. And sadly, while the level variety is better than in Battle for Volcano Island, it still feels a lot to be desired because most of this game takes place inside of factories, which can get a little repetitive. You might have noticed that I brought up mech suits a while back. Well, in some levels, instead of platforming, you control a mech where you shoot a bunch of enemies. These aren't the worst things ever, but they're my least favorite part of the game. All you do in these is just shoot enemies and defeat giant obstacles at the end of a level, which is the closest thing this game has to bosses. Another cool thing about this game is that all 11 characters get their own costume, similar to the last game, and you get these by purchasing cubes that you've collected in a level instead of every character having their own collectibles. And I just find it neat of how these costumes became a staple of the franchise. All 3 console games had them. And lastly, for the gameplay, there are achievements to complete just like in Battle for Volcano Island. These consist of freeing some fairies to playing as a certain duo. If you couldn't tell already, I've had so much to talk about with this game, and I haven't even gone in the presentation yet. Speaking of which, well, the graphics are pretty much on par with Volcano Island, so no need to talk about them again. The music in this game is absolutely phenomenal. It may legit be my favorite OST in any Nickelodeon game ever. Now, I'm admittedly not the best at discussing music, so I'll do my best to explain. It has this industrial feel to it, which is super unique for a Nicktoons game. The SpongeBob songs have this gentle feel to them, and the factory music can either feel bouncy or atmospheric. I hope you all have a decent understanding of what I'm trying to get across, but overall, I love this game's soundtrack. Whew, alright. I think we're on this game for long enough. Let's finish the game and give out my final thoughts. After conquering every toy factory and collecting enough master models, the team heads to Calamitus's lair for the final level and fights the final boss of the game. A wall. But then the heroes finally get to Calamitus, and it was revealed that Chatbot won the biggest genius award because he has the most master models. And that's where the game ends. Very weird ending. And that was Nicktoons Attack of the Toy Bots. If you couldn't tell by how long this segment was, I absolutely love this game. Do I wish it was longer? Yes. Could I see more potential in the idea? Absolutely. But I'm just grateful for the game we already have. a fun crossover platformer with a fantastic roster and wonderful soundtrack and a bunch of neat extra content like costumes and achievements. I can tell that for the 1 year this game was in development, they put a lot of love into it. This is, without a doubt, my favorite one so far. But can the handheld versions even compare to this masterpiece? Let's start out by talking about Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots on Game Boy Advance. Now, I would normally say that the story for report of one of these games is exactly the same, but with some slight changes. But that's not the case for Attack of the Toybots on GBA. While it still has the biggest genius game show plot, Calamitous actually managed to kidnap the 5 main characters of the game. Cosmo and Wanda show up, but they can only free one character, and the only way to unlock another one is by defeating a boss. Definitely an interesting concept, but this sadly means that there are no secret playable characters like in the console version. But how is this idea done in the gameplay? Well, it's another 2D platformer, but like the other GBA games, each character has their own little quirks they can use to get through levels. SpongeBob has a melee attack and can go underwater. Timmy has a very strange attack of where he can turn enemies into objects that he can platform on, but it has to recharge for a few seconds and it actually doesn't kill enemies, which gets really annoying. And he can turn into a frog and fit through tight spaces. Jimmy can shriek enemies and change the direction of certain platforms. Danny can have a melee attack and can phase through ghost walls. And Tack has a melee attack and can climb ropes. And depending on who you say first, that character actually gets upgrades, which is neat. But sadly, it's not that interesting in execution. A lot of these are just stronger attacks or attacks in certain scenarios. Now, these abilities can be decently fun to use, but considering that you cannot switch characters, these abilities are more like a key that everyone has to get to the end of a level with. As you go through a level, you'll also see these very bizarre cameos either characters in the shows represented or they're from other shows. One would logically think that they would have some reason to be here, but no, they don't do anything. You can't play as them, you can't recruit them, you can't even interact with them. I literally have no idea why they're here, but it's kinda neat, I guess. But how each level goes is that you can find an entrance to a factory, and then you go through the factory, and then you defeat the boss at the end. There are some tank sections that are kinda neat, but really mindless. Just keep shooting and you'll be fine. But after beating the next level as the character you started as, you're then told to get the other characters to the end of the level as well. So at the end of the game, this means you have to play the final level 5 times. This is just a really weird and not super fun system, especially when some of these levels go on for like 10 minutes. I can get why they did this. They want you to go through alternate paths through the levels, but every playthrough just feels a bit too samey for that to feel worth it. As for the bosses themselves, just like a lot of these other handheld ports, they're easy and not worth discussing. But what makes this system even stranger is the fact there isn't even a save feature. It's password based. But the way it works is actually different from a normal password system. While this system usually sends you to a level you want to play, this one sends you to a level with the characters and their upgrades they would have collected at that point. And I assume the reason they chose this system is because you would otherwise have to play this 6 times. 5 as every character and then as expert mode. But with this password system, you can actually complete every character's story and just go to expert mode. But if they knew how tedious it would be, then why did they even go with this system in the first place? So yeah, really strange gameplay overall. Presentation-wise, it's good, but nothing amazing, which is a shame considering how much the personality of Battle for Volcano Island really shined. But let's just wrap this one up and move on to the final thoughts. After freeing all 5 characters, we head into Calamitous' lair where we get a final boss, not even something the console version had, so it has that going for it. But we defeat him, foil Calamitous' plans, and that concludes Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots on GBA. Now, I did like some of its ideas, but it definitely could have been better. The way it handles with its upgrades and progressions is so abstract and odd that it becomes one of the less replayable ones for me. The small roster is also a problem considering that was arguably the best thing about the console version, and everyone being reduced to just pointless cameos just felt so wrong. So sadly this is one of the weaker games, but we still have one more version that can hopefully turn things around. Let's look at Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots for DS. Now we're going back to the versions that have a similar story to the console counterpart, but with some minor changes. Basically, Patrick gets trapped inside an evil toy factory, and Jimmy shows up with the others to help SpongeBob get Patrick back, save other Nicktoon characters, and conquer all the toy factories. That's about it for the story. On to gameplay! To start off, I want to discuss the roster for this version. We have SpongeBob, Danny, Timmy, Jimmy, Tack, Patrick, XJ9, and Gurr all returning from the console version. But for the first time, we have a port with exclusive characters. Those being El Tigre, Zim, and Mr. Blick for some reason. So we already have a fantastic roster, and what's even better is that with the exception of Gurr, you have to get every character. Oh, there's also SpongeGar and Evil Danny that you can unlock by entering in cheat codes. Just figured I'd mention that. But as for the gameplay itself, it actually isn't a platformer, but instead a beat 'em up, with some characters being melee and others being ranged. You can bring up to 2 characters you want to play in a level, much like the console version, which is very much appreciated. But every level goes like this. You have to go through a few rooms where you have to fight a bunch of enemies. But occasionally, you'll have to do a touchscreen puzzle in order to progress. About halfway through the level, you have to defeat a mini-boss so you can get access to a mech suit, which is way more powerful than the character's attack. Then at the end of the level, you come across a giant machine that you need to destroy. But after that, you have to play this car minigame where you destroy boxes, and there are also 5 pictures you can get in each minigame. While these aren't required to beat the game, getting all 25 unlocks Gurr. And then finally, you have to defeat a boss at the end of the level, and your health is determined by how many screws you got in the level. Now I know that might felt like a lot, but trust me when I say it's really basic when you actually play it. But there was just something about this that was honestly really engaging. I genuinely wanted to keep playing, and it was probably because of the presentation. I think this may be my favorite presentation out of every game so far. It's just so cool seeing how many Nicktoons characters are animated in this pixel art style, and it all just feels so fluid, and the music is amazing. I feel like it's tied with the console version. While that one was more ambitious, this soundtrack has a more rock and roll vibe to it. Just listen to this boss theme. Overall, the presentation is just stunning and awesome! Okay, let's wrap up this version. After beating all 5 levels in the game, we head into Calamitous' lair where we do a boss rush and then we fight and defeat him. Oh yeah, and the whole game show thing is only brought up at the ending of this version instead of at the beginning of the game. But that is Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots DS! Now this one was a really basic beat 'em up, so it probably should have gotten bored. But the different gameplay styles in the levels and the awesome presentation and the massive roster made it way more fun, at least for me. I guess I could say it was more of a fun experience rather than a fun game, but it's my list, so I can say it was a great time. And that covers every version of Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots. Man, what a friggin' good time. Sure, the GBA version wasn't that great, but the console and DS version were absolutely incredible. Now it feels like the series can now expand with 14 characters on the team, but that sadly isn't the case because we only have one overall set of games left. But hey, maybe they decided to go out with the most epic Nicktoons adventure they could think of. So let's head into the final set in this series. SpongeBob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom, released on October 20th, 2008 for PlayStation 2, Wii, and DS. I can immediately tell that this name change was last minute because you can barely see the featuring on the box art. That's not a good sign, but this game can still be fun, right? Well, let's finish this saga, starting with the console version. So the game starts with Bikini Bottom getting invaded by some orange slime that brainwashes anyone that touches it. But Jimmy shows up through a portal and takes SpongeBob and Patrick to Volcano Island from the second game, which is admittedly a really neat callback. So it's up to the Nicktoons to find out what is causing all the slime and put an end to it. That is pretty much all there is to the story. But who are the characters chosen to complete this task? Well, we have SpongeBob, Danny, Jimmy, Tack, Zim, Plankton, Technus, Beautiful Gorgeous, Treylock, and Deb. Okay, I think I should get what is easily this game's biggest flaw out of the way. This roster is horrible. Now, I do understand what they were trying to go for. They wanted to play as both the heroes and the villains. But not only do I vastly prefer what Attack of the Toybots had, the villains they chose for this game just feel so random. Like, who wanted to play as Technus? Another pretty massive flaw is that Timmy is not playable. He's not even here at all! I know this was around the time where the copyright with Fairly Odd Parents got really bad, so I could forgive this if they would have chosen another Nicktoon that would have fit into the group. They could have had XJ9 or El Tigre, but instead we got Zim, who feels like the last character that should have been included in a game where the concept is heroes and villains teaming up. At least in Attack of the Toybots DS, he wasn't a replacement. Also, Tack returned, and I still don't like him. Already not off to the best start with his really bad roster, but maybe the gameplay can still be fun. Well, the gameplay is somewhat more in line with Battle for Volcano Island, with the levels feeling less demanding, but unlike Attack of the Toybots, you can't choose who you want to bring into a level, which would be fine, but again, the characters play exactly the same. Well, except for a special attack they have, but that's really it, and I rarely ever use this because the combat is so simple. Now, despite my complaining, there are a few minor positives. First off, I do like that when you free a character at the end of a level, they get added to the hub world. That is admittedly cool and gives them a nice sense of progression. And in terms of level variety, it's probably the best of the 4 games, considering you actually explore the Nicktoon worlds, instead of just mostly jungles or beaches or factories. But I can't even give that much praise. Why? Well, I hope you like the color orange, because it's all you're gonna see for about 70% of this game. I legit got so annoyed, and it honestly just messed with my eyes. But that's really about it for praise, because the levels are just kinda average. Not bad, but I just don't have a lot to say about them. There's 2 trophies you can get in each level that gives access to cheat codes, but not much else. Well, we at least have boss battles again, unlike the console version of Attack of the Toybots, but they still aren't very good. One final thing about the gameplay is that before you can even start a level, you have to play the slide minigame every single time you have to enter a level, which just got really tedious and annoying, and this minigame just goes on for like a minute. And you have to play this minigame, if you're doing it perfectly, 14 times. So yeah, this got really annoying and I don't like it. You can also play this game in 2-player co-op, but the camera will not like you if you do that. So yeah, not the worst game I've played, but far from the best. But what's actually really bad is the presentation. I'll just cut to the chase with this one. This game is so ugly. The characters have this weird shine to them, and it's just so gross and distracting. And all the environments themselves look like they came out of some Rabbids game from the early 2010s. And the catchy soundtrack from Attack of the Toybots is replaced with really boring alien music. Let's just hurry up and finish this game. We then head into space to fight the one causing all of this, Globulus Maximus. One boring and long fight later, the villains betray the heroes and Globulus joins the teams to stop the villains. The villains lose and the game ends. And that was SpongeBob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom. God, what a wet fart this was. The gameplay, while not bad, felt really generic. The roster is just awful and the presentation is so disgusting. As a game, it's fine, but as a crossover, it's pretty bad. This is honestly my least favorite of the Nicktoons Unite games. Not just the console ones, but all of them we've looked at so far. But we still have one more game left. Can this last one save the franchise from disappointment? Let's find out with the final game for this video, SpongeBob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom DS. As to be expected at this point, the story is pretty much the same as it is in the console version, but somehow the roster is exactly the same as the console version. Great, out of every handheld sequel, this one gets the roster correct, and it just so happens to be the one with the worst roster in the history of ever. But you all know the drill at this point, we gotta talk about the gameplay. Now, even though on the surface it looks really similar to Attack of the Toybots on DS, it actually isn't a beat-em-up, but instead a puzzle platformer. For each world, you get two characters that both have unique abilities, and you have to get them both to the end of the level. SpongeBob can blow bubble platforms, Technus can glide, Danny can phase through ghost walls, Plankton can spawn a rocket platform, Tack can freeze enemies, Beautiful Gorgeous can climb walls, Jimmy can fly, Dib can control electricity, Zim can hang on to ceilings, and Drelok can stun hazards. Now this style was surprisingly fun! Really fun! Using each character to solve a puzzle was honestly satisfying, especially given how many abilities each character has and how many characters you get to use. But it gets even better, because every level has around 1 to 3 secret stars that you can collect. Some of them are hidden, while others require you to collect a certain amount of gems. But it gets even better, because I found out that there is something that no one ever talks about in this version of the game. There is a ranking system, and unlike Battle for Volcano Island DS's ranking system, it isn't just given to you after you collect all the stars. You actually have to manage time, health, gem collection, etc. This made this way more fun than it would have been. As for the bosses, they still aren't very good, but what did you expect for these bosses at this point? I do like the selection more for the bosses than in the console version. Like in Amity Park, you actually fight Vlad. So Plankton must fight who he once teamed up with in the first game. How poetic. Presentation-wise, I don't have much to say other than I like it more than the console version. The characters don't look ugly, the music is much better, and I feel like they're slightly less orange and it felt easier on the eyes, so there's that. Now let's wrap up this series for good. After beating all 5 worlds, we can select which duo to fight the final boss, which is pretty cool and all, but I just picked Jimmy and Dib because Jimmy can literally fly. After defeating Globulus Maximus and the villains, we have reached the end of SpongeBob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom DS. Now this version was much better. Its gameplay was more engaging with the bonus stars and ranking system, and it also had better presentation, but it's still not perfect because there's still one problem holding it back. The roster is still horrible, much like the console version. But even then, I can still say that they at least tried to take advantage of the bad roster by having them play differently. I can't say it's perfect, but it's still really good. And that's it. All 11 games. This was certainly a journey. But now it's time for my final thoughts on this franchise. Now, are these games perfect? No, absolutely not. I'm pretty sure this video made it clear that these games definitely have their flaws, whether it be the roster, gameplay, or just being too short. But despite it all, I still love this franchise all the same. Even though they could have done better, I still find it amazing that Nick created a series with their most iconic characters and made it into an ongoing narrative. Even Globs of Doom, for as mediocre as it was, still had some charm to it. Besides, Nickelodeon crossover games that were made both before and after Unite's time prove that you can do a lot worse with a Nickelodeon crossover. But now that we are done talking about this series, it's time we rank all the games from my least to most favorite. Here we go! Starting off with the only D tier we have, number 11, SpongeBob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom console. For C tiers, we've got number 10, Nicktoons Unite DS. Number 9, Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots GBA. As for B tiers, they are number 8, Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island DS. Number 7, Nicktoons Unite GBA. And number 6, Nicktoons Unite console. On to the A tiers, which are number 5, SpongeBob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom DS. Number 4, Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island GBA. And number 3, Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island console. And to wrap things up with the S tiers, being number 2, Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots DS. And number 1, my favorite Nicktoons Unite game, Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots console. Now hold on there! Don't think that this is the end of our Nicktoons journey yet. Sure, we looked at all the Unite games, but there are still plenty of crossover games that I have yet to look at. Y'all better get ready, cause I have 3 more Nicktoon crossover videos planned. So stay tuned for when I look at every single game on Steam and try to get all achievements. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.